All right, guys, today we're going to talk about some of the issues of genetics. And one of the things that we want to preface before we get into the issues are one of the laws with genetics was what we call independent assortment. And what that means is just because one chromosome goes to one cell, the others don't follow it. All right, so for example, if blue goes to one side, the other blues don't follow it. If yellow goes to one side, the yellows don't follow it. And so what independent assortment means and adds to is that it gives us more variety. It's saying that genes separate independently of one another when sperm or egg are created. And also it means that we get variety with those offspring. So when we talk about problems with chromosomes, collectively, this is called non-disjunction. So this typically happens in meiosis more so than mitosis. In meiosis, the double split causes more issues than the single split of mitosis. So non-disjunction essentially means the uneven pull of chromosomes during meiosis. So remember what is supposed to happen is they're supposed to line up with their partner. So let's say this is chromosome 1 from mom, 1 from dad, 2 from mom, 2 from dad. And so they separate 1, 2, 1, 2. Then the half X is split, and we're supposed to end up with 4 cells that have 2 chromosomes, having the number 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we have 1, 2. When we have non-disjunction, it can happen in one of two spots. It can be where the homologous chromosomes don't separate properly, or it can be when the chromatids don't separate properly. This happens in females, especially over the age of 35, where the spindle fibers, which remember these are like the fishing lines, they start to get a little bit more fragile and frail, and they break, kind of like a fishing line when you have a big fish. So what this does is it creates uneven amounts of chromosomes in the sperm or in the egg. And when they unite with what's, say, a normal one, now you have a wrong number. And so a couple things can happen. You create what are called trisomy or monosomy illnesses. So remember that in our cells, we're supposed to have 2 copies of each chromosome. One we get from our mom. Okay, so we're saying that the cell has 4 total chromosomes, and then 1 set we get from our dad. That's what's supposed to happen. A trisomy illness would mean that we have a chromosome that has 3. A monosomy illness would mean that we only got 1 copy. So prefix tri, 3, mono, 1. Oftentimes, these trisomy and monosomy illnesses don't result in viable pregnancies. Oftentimes, they're miscarried or they don't make it until maturity. The reason for that is we are designed as humans, and really as all biology, to have copies from each parent. Some of the more common illnesses that we see that do result in birth, at least, include Down syndrome, Prader-Willi, and Cri-du-Chat. There are some other ones like Edwards syndrome, Patau syndrome, other trisomy or monosomy illnesses that 90 to 95%, if not higher than that, will result in a miscarriage or an unviable pregnancy. And so that's why it's really, really important, and we're all very fortunate if we do have the correct number of chromosomes to be at least phenotypically or genotypically normal. So this is an individual that has Down syndrome. It's also known as trisomy 21. So they would have a 3rd copy of the chromosome 21 in all of their cells. So that happened because either the mom's egg or the dad's sperm had 1 extra copy of 21. When it became a zygote, it kept that way, kept that way, kept that way, and so all of their cells have 3 chromosomes in that 21st. So what we do to identify this, and the knowledge and the science and the affordability of this has really increased over the last 15 years, is you can do what's called a fetoscopy or genetic testing. So what they can do is they take a cell from the fetus, and that's like a baby obviously unborn, and they'll be able to separate their chromosomes, match them up with their partner, and see, does the number match up. They can also, the science on this has gotten so good that they can not only see if there's any monosomy or trisomies, but they can see, are they at risk for cystic fibrosis? Are they at risk for Alzheimer's? Are they at risk for cancers? And it's a super powerful science, but also somewhat controversial because, what if you found out and you were, let's say, halfway to having this baby, And then you get into the controversy of, well, abortion, not abortion, and that sort of thing. And so it can really add a lot of unrest or uncertainty to the pregnancy. And so some couples will say, yeah, we want to know, and then carry that worry with them. Or some will say, nope, we're going to love this child no matter what it looks like and no matter however it comes out. So that's something that is a little bit controversial with this science and with this technology. So when we talk about genetics, remember we want to have 2 copies, one from mom, one from dad. Why do we have a 50-50 shot of being a male or a female? So if we look at a good old-fashioned Punnett square, if you're a male and a female, I'm going to go back actually. So if you're a female, you are XX. If you're a male, you are XY. So the reason why it ends up being 50-50 is if you're a female, that means that you have 2 X chromosomes. You got the X for sure from your mom because that's all she can give you, but your dad gave you the other X. If you're a male, you definitely got your X from your mom, but then your Y from your dad. So if I ask the question, who determines your sex, your mom or your dad? The answer is your dad. No matter what, mom gives you her X, but dad is either going to give you an X if you're a girl or a Y if you're a boy. Abnormal splitting can also happen on the 23rd chromosome, and so we call those our sex chromosomes. So when we look at this 23, it's got an XYY. Well, okay, we just said you can either be an XX or an XY, so what the heck's an XYY? And so these things can happen on the 23rd chromosome. They're called our sex chromosomes. And then these other 22 are what we call our autosomal chromosomes. So when we have XXY, is that a girl or a boy? Well, it's a boy, but because they have an additional X, they have female-like characteristics. Breast development, widened hips, underdeveloped testes, higher pitched voice, as just some of the phenotypic things that they might have. If you're XXX, this actually phenotypically, these girls look normal, but what happens is they are more likely to have kids that have maybe the ones that aren't as good to have. Turner syndrome is a monosomy illness. That means that you just got one X and one X only. A lot of these are miscarriages, but the ones that do survive are undersized. They themselves are sterile and have poor sexual characteristics, like underdeveloped breast, no widening of hips. Again, they're not able to have children, just as a few of the symptoms. And then you have what we call super male syndrome, where you have an additional Y. So phenotypically, they look normal. However, they are thought to go through puberty a little bit early because of that increased amount of the Y chromosome. And then they also are going to have children that will be more likely to have the ones that maybe aren't so good to have. So again, these two look normal, but the offspring that they have might not look normal. Okay, so then we go back to the things that add to variation. Independent assortment, we talked about that one. The random alignment, remember we don't have just blue on one side, red on the other. That's completely random. Crossing over, where like chromosomes will exchange fragments of DNA. You have mutations that hand them randomly. We just talk about with mutations, if you're 35 and older and having babies, if you're female, you're more likely to have these mutations because those spindle fibers start to fray and become fragile over time. And then lastly, you have the random fertilization. That's the odds of a certain sperm being a certain egg. So I want to end with talking about this, and that is what we call family pedigrees. So throughout this chapter, we've talked about how our genetics come from our family. So this is my immediate family, myself, my sister, there's my dad, and my mom. And so if I ask you guys, what characteristics do you see common in our family? You might say hair, you might say eyes, you might say stature or height, nose, that sort of things, and you're exactly right. So you are a product of your parents. But not only that, but you can also trace, what are some of the illnesses that might be found in your family. So that's why doctors will oftentimes ask you about family history. There's a whole bunch of different symbols and signs that are used to describe different family pedigrees. You can use names, you can use generation numbers, you can use colors, you can use shades. But what they really do is they can help you trace, hey, where did this blank come from? If we're talking about disease, where did our blue eyes come from? Where did our tongue rolling ability come from? Where did our stature come from? And so just a quick example of this. So this is actually my family with just different names. This is me. My name is not Marcus, it's Mr. So if I trace just my bloodline, if I look at my direct lines, my parents are Mike and Jill, we have blue eyes. I have blue eyes. Makes good sense. All of my blood relatives also have blue eyes. But what's cool is if we start to see brown eyes appear, that didn't come from my family lineage. Basically, everyone in my family, except for my great grandpa and my great grandma, had blue eyes. Even though it's a recessive trait, it's popular in our family. So when we start to look at Chuck, who's a uncle of mine, but not married or bloodline to my family, he brought in brown eyes, which means that he brought in different genes. So you can really look at your family bloodline, but then also look at the married ins and what they might bring into your family. So family pedigrees are fun because they help you. It's kind of fun to talk about these at Christmas time and Thanksgiving or every holiday, but it's kind of cool to trace what your family looks like throughout time.